Hey there. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tinnitist TV. Today, I am talking to Stan Warnow. Now, he's not a professional musician. He's actually a filmmaker and editor whose resume includes the Woodstock documentary, the No Nukes concert film, the classic B-movie Honeymoon Killers, Saturday Night Live, and tons more. But even though he'd probably be more at home at the Oscars, Stan will be at the 66th Annual Grammy Awards in Los Angeles this year. He's going because his late father, a musician, composer, and inventor named Raymond Scott, is up for an award. Now, if you've ever watched an old Warner Brothers cartoon with Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, or Wile E. Coyote, you've heard Scott's music. But he's not nominated for that. He's up for Best Instrumental Composition for a song called Cutey the Dragon, which he started writing back in 1982 and which bandleader Gordon Goodwin recently completed and included on his 2023 album, Raymond Scott Reimagined. You should definitely check that out, along with the 2010 documentary Deconstructing Dad, Stan's tribute to his incredibly fascinating father. On the day Woodstock performer Melanie died, Stan and I got on Zoom to talk about the Grammys, his dad, contemporary filmmaking, and plenty more. Enjoy. How are you today?
I'm okay, a little crazy busy, but glad to be talking to you.
Oh, yeah, same here. And I can understand crazy busy. I'm sure it's
Yeah,
kind of a frantic couple of weeks for you.
yeah, just getting ready for the Grammys and dealing with everything else here.
Yeah, well, let's start with the Grammys. For people who don't know, your dad, Raymond Scott, is up for a posthumous award for Best Instrumental Composition for a song called "Cutey the Dragon" that he and I believe your sister started writing many years ago, and then Gordon Goodwin came in and kind of finished and turned into a fully formed creation and recorded. Have I got that more or less?
More or less, except it wasn't my sister. It was basically he wrote it for my niece, his granddaughter, and my
Niece,
sister's
sorry.
daughter, Kathy, and she was Cutie. And she, at that time, was a very serious viola student and was visiting him in California in that way of his where he could always relate to people through the areas that he was very skillful and talented and accomplished in. And obviously, music was the main one of those. So he would work with her and then he wanted her to be able to play quickly in different registers, so he wrote this tune for her to play, and it was really just a sketch, and it
Right.
was kind of in a drawer for 40 years. And then my sister did, we had a Raymond Scott festival in 2018, and my sister mentioned to Jeremy Cohen, who produced the record and plays on it, that this tune existed, and he was very interested, and one thing led to another, and then Gordon came on board and rewrote it, not rewrote it, but expanded it. It was just
Right.
an idea. It was a sketch. Even on the sheet music my dad wrote, he said an idea. And Gordon did a great job expanding it, wrote more sections, including a bridge, and then it was recorded for this album, Raymond Scott Reimagined.
And it must be great to have this kind of recognition for him after all these years.
Oh, it is. It's incredible. I mean, there has been a long, like in
Sure.
around by 1990, he was completely forgotten, completely unknown, except for a very tiny coterie of people. And then gradually he was rediscovered thanks to a bunch of people, Erwin Chusey, a man named Byron Werner, who really got the ball rolling, and others, many others since. And so my dad was frustrated and felt he hadn't gotten the long-term recognition he deserved. So he'd be just thrilled to finally be getting a Grammy. And the Grammys didn't start till I think 57 or 58.
Right.
And by that time his high profile career was pretty much over.
Yeah, so I mean to have this is yeah, just fantastic. I think you've got a decent chance. You've got some stiff competition in the category. You're up
Yeah,
against John Williams and
yeah,
Ludwig Göransson, who's kind of the moment right now for
yeah,
Oppenheimer.
yeah, yeah. Right. So, it's not a slam dunk, as they say, by any means, but we've got a chance,
Yeah.
Gordon and Jeremy are both well known to the Academy, and there is a story here, which I hope people, the voters, have learned about. There is a personal story, which I think appeals to people.
Yeah, and I mean, no matter how it goes, I think this is literally one of those cases where the nomination is kind of the win.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah. And
Yeah,
I think it's interesting because maybe a lot of people who are watching this are going Raymond Scott. I don't know Raymond Scott, but they do know Raymond Scott because if you've
yeah,
ever watched,
yeah, right.
anything, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Yeah,
hmm?
I mean, Raymond Scott, people know his music.
Yeah.
And then even, they know his music from the Warner Brothers cartoons, or a whole lot of people know it from then. And then there's been this whole other aspect of the kind of discovery, not even really the rediscovery, but the discovery of his electronic music.
Hmm.
Um, Thanks mainly to this album. It's now almost 20 years old, called Manhattan Research, and so there's that group of people, and I often, it's like the old elephant story, where blind men pulling,
Right.
around an elephant, because people know about it from these different aspects, and often they know he did the cartoons, they don't know he did the electronic music, or they know he did the electronic music, they have no idea about the cartoons. So, it's all parts of who he was. And then lately, we had Lizzo sampled a tune on her big breakthrough album. So that was incredible too. And that's, again, my dad was one of those people who's kind of famous among the famous. So
Sure.
people like Lizzo's production team knew about him, and one thing led to another with them, and ended up sampling this on her big album.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, yeah.
But if I got it right, he sold all the rights to everything to Warner Brothers, right? So there's no
A
financial
lot of
windfall in
it.
it for you guys on that, right?
No, no, there is, he's a lot of the earlier pieces are owned by Warner Brothers.
Uh,
Uh, Most of the electronic music we control,
oh, good.
and there are this other music that they don't own everything, but the
Right.
ones that are used most prominently in cartoons, which are the ones he was best known for many years, yes,
Yeah,
that's
right.
that's Warner Brothers and
But he was, I mean,
Hollywood.
nowadays people are selling their catalogs all the time, but I don't
Yeah,
think it was necessarily as common back then. He was kind of a pioneer in
yeah.
that way. And it seems to me in a lot of ways, I mean, he strikes me, your dad, as being just a guy who was ahead of his time in a bunch of different ways.
Oh, totally, totally. I mean, I did a film about him,
Right.
and one of my titles was going to be Raymond Scott Ahead of His Time. I didn't end up using that title. I sort of went with something a little more original in a way, Deconstructing
Deconstructing Dad,
Dad. Yeah,
right?
because it was a personal film, so it was not
Right.
only about his career, it was about the father son, the parental relationship. Because when I made my film, I wanted it to be not only appealing to kind of the Raymond Scott nerds who knew about the music. I wanted to make a film for everybody, and I've had that reaction often with wives and girlfriends who said, "Oh, I had no interest in Raymond Scott, but I saw your film and I loved the whole story about who he was as a parent." Yeah,
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, just such an eclectic career. I mean, obviously the cartoon stuff in the Warner Brothers. And as you mentioned, the electronic, he was obviously this polymath inventor, tinkerer guy. And then he ends up working with Barry Gordy at
yeah,
Motown, which just
yeah.
strikes me as totally left field.
Yeah, no, what happened was is my father was never great at publicity, but he did try, and he developed this machine that composed and performed music simultaneously. And this he started working on it actually in the late 50s even. So at the time a machine like that, which was a precursor to artificial intelligence in certain ways, was kind of unheard of. And
Yeah.
he kind of had been making electronic music instruments all along, and each one that he made was kind of incorporated into the next one. And then the Electronium was his final big project. And he had released some stories about it, or was got some coverage, and Berry Gordy wrote about it, and he was always looking. He was a formula guy. He was looking for the
Right.
formula for the next Motown hit. So he thought, oh, this machine that writes the music, maybe we could use this. And they came out and they looked at it out in Long Island, and they offered to buy it. And then this machine was so complicated that it wasn't like he could just give it to them. And they had an agreement where he would come out for something like 6 weeks to train people, and he actually stayed for that first period in a little apartment above Berry Gordy's garage, where they had the machine there too. Um, uh, and then the 6 weeks led to 6 months, and then the 6 months led to a permanent job.
Wow. And I understand that Mark Mothersbaugh has maybe is it the last electronium in
Well, it's
existence?
the only electronium. There was a
Okay.
prototype, and then there was the
Oh, okay. They
electronium that
never
was
made
made.
more than,
No,
yeah.
no, and Mark does have it. Mark is, you talk about famous among the famous. He's been a Raymond Scott fan for 30 or 40 years now.
Yeah.
And they did a sample of Powerhouse in one of their early tunes. And I
Yeah.
remember Mark telling me that we didn't think about who had written it. It was just like something that was out there. And even though, he's a composer himself, they just used it. And then later on, it was discovered, and they were fine with that. And they paid royalties, etc. But he heard about Raymond Scott living in Van Nuys at the time, I think through Byron Warner, and arranged to go out there. And again, one thing led to another. I find myself using that phrase a lot today. But
Seems to be how his life went.
he ended up buying the machine. My father at that time was in bad financial straits, and Mark bought the machine, and he still has it.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. There's talk always. There was an effort made to restore it, which ultimately didn't work out. But a lot of progress was made. So maybe someday the job will be finished. But Mark has it. It's in a warehouse in LA, and sometimes people get to see it.
Wow, crazy. But talking about your father's financial thing, I kind of get the sense that was maybe one area where he was more interested in the inventions and the doing
Yeah.
things and not so much
Yeah.
the best businessman, maybe.
No, no, he was not the best businessman. I mean, my favorite story about that is that, he had his protege, who then they got married, Dorothy Collins, who was a singer on the show, The Hit Parade, that he kind of, she was his protege. But eventually the things went bad, and they got divorced, and they sold this house, very big, wonderful house, mansion, really, in Long Island, that I would go out and stay there sometimes. And and then his third wife, Mitzi, told me this story of how when they sold it, he got $100,000, which in those days would be like 1 million today.
Sure.
And he put it all in traveler's checks, and whenever he needed money, he'd write a traveler's check. And one day it was all gone.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
and he never, yeah. And the other story I remember him telling me about that money. Oh, a couple of stories. One was that when he was in the 30s, he was working they brought his band out to Hollywood to be in movies. And on weekends, he'd go drive out to the valley and pass, this during the Depression, these orange groves and fields for sale for like next to nothing. And it was people in the know knew that they were going to be worth a lot of money someday, but
right.
nobody told him. He once told me, if somebody had said I should buy some land, I would have bought it, but he never did. So he
Well,
wasn't the best with money. He was an artist, a creator, a visionary, but no, not a financial guy.
yeah. And you clearly inherited some of the artistic genes. You've had I think, a fascinating career of your own, editing and filmmaking,
Yeah.
and you were a cameraman on Woodstock.
Yes, and an editor on the
Yeah, I mean,
Woodstock
what's
film.
your kind of overriding memory of that experience?
Well, it was very clear as it was building up. I mean, even before that, it was kind of clear. It was I remember a friend of mine and I would discuss it, and we even thought about trying to do a film, but that didn't get very far. But fortunately, I was already had good relationships with the Michael Wadley and the people who did the film.
Right.
Uh, but it was going to be, we thought maybe it's going to be this year's Monterey Pop. Obviously, it went way beyond that. So when we were there, I got the call I had thought about going as an attendee, and then I realized it was going to be so crowded I didn't want to go. But fortunately, I got the call to be a cameraman on it. So I was there, and it was very clear this was an epic historical event as it was happening. Um, and it was 3 days of peace music and no sleep. And and then was very lucky to get involved with the editing. It was a kind of a process, but
Right.
I ended up editing on the film for 9 months and doing mainly cuts of musical sequences. I didn't really inherit my father's musical talent. I play a little bit and play piano a little bit and write my own little tunes that'll never see the light of day. But um, I did inherit some things, and one of them is a good sense of rhythm, and that's important in editing. So I
Right.
ended up doing a lot of musical sequences in Woodstock, along with other editors,
Sure.
with Thelma Schoonmaker, who's now a legend,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
a fellow by the name of Yu Bunyi, who was incredibly good at cutting performance,
Yeah.
and
Well, I mean,
Michael
Thelma, I mean,
Wadley.
Scorsese was a cameraman too, right?
No, Marty wasn't a cameraman. He was um, um, uh, 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 there was a lot of controversy about what his credit was and everything, but I think he ended up being an associate director
Ah,
and
okay.
was worked on the editing for a while, and then didn't make the trip out to LA. Other things were happening for him.
Sure. Is there a segment of the movie that you shot or cut that you're especially proud of?
Well, probably the Santana sequence. Yeah,
Mm,
that was, the one that a lot of people stands out to a lot of people that I edited, and
nice.
that was it was clear they were unknown at the time, but it was clear that it was a great tune. It was a great tune for for to be presented on screen as well
Yeah.
because it's so dynamic, with
Yeah, no
Michael
kidding.
Reed.
And
Yeah,
then in the way of I think with the phrase of the day, one thing leading to another, then you
yeah,
went to work with Murray Lerner on the Isle of Wight.
yeah. But that was 20 years later because even
Right.
though I believe that was 1970, there was, there's always a backstory to everything. And so
Sure.
with that one, there was a whole financial thing where, the producers went bust on that. And the footage was tied up legally for years. So
Mm.
even though Murray had been there shooting, he didn't really own it. And it took like 25 years for him to get the rights. So I think we did that. It was like 94 or
Oh,
something.
okay. So No Nukes would have come before that then, since you
No
worked.
Nukes was a film I worked on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another, I do have a lot of concert films in my past. So No Nukes
Yeah.
was one of them that was, maybe late 80s. When was that? I don't
No
know.
Nukes, late 70s, I think,
Late
kind of.
70s, maybe
Yeah.
late 70s. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. 80,
Yeah.
maybe 1980, because it was just around, because Springsteen plays the river, and I think it was kind of new right around that point. So that's probably around 1980.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is going to be talk about nerding out here. When I saw in your credit list that you edited the Honeymoon Killers,
Yeah.
I was thrilled.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was very early on. I had just really graduated from NYU, and I was, asked that they needed somebody to sync the dailies. You know what that means, I
Yeah.
assume.
Yeah.
I hope your listeners do, put the sound and picture together back in the day when it wasn't all on video, and um, on location. And I came up there, and then the producers started asking me to maybe, and the director, who was also the writer, the well, long story there too, that I'm not going to go into, but started asking me to put together some sequences, and they liked what I was doing. And I ended up editing the film. And at the time, it was a very low budget film, and we
Sure.
all thought of it as a B movie, and
Yeah, very definitely.
certainly, yeah, and a film noir, clearly in some respects. Um,
Yeah,
but
but a classic.
it
Yeah.
became a huge success. Well, for a niche art house kind of film, which is what it became. And I think largely in part the writer and director Leonard,
Yeah.
um, was an opera composer, classical music lover,
Right.
and he wanted to use only Mahler music, and I think that gave the film a kind of different feel than it would have had he used a more conventional score. And
Hmm.
especially in Europe, I mean, Francois Truffaut at one point called his favorite American film, which was, for a person who was such a student of Hitchcock, it was an amazing compliment.
Oh, totally. And it was all in the editing, sir. All in the editing.
No, I wish, and I think I did a pretty good job, but no,
You did. So
it
you
wasn't.
mentioned having a rhythm, in terms of, and I can see how that applies in obviously in musical things, not
Yeah,
literally, but what are some other secrets to being an effective editor?
yeah. Well, I think being being an effective editor, first of all, I mean, yes, there's the obvious relationship when you're working with music,
Sure.
but editing is so much about rhythm overall, even if
Hmm.
there's no music. It's about the rhythm of the shots and the pace. And it's kind of like part of the directing process too. It's it's funny because in Canada, the editors are part of the director's guild there,
Hmm.
which they're not here. But it is like an extension of the director's process. So the other thing is editing, I mean, rhythm, and then, the other things for me, and pace, which is also about editing, but I used to have a saying when I was working, like, pace overall. And, you hear directors talk, a lot of them, and they'll talk about how pace is so important. And then not worrying too much. Like a lot of editors, when they're just starting out and they're learning, and they know the basics of these things about match cuts and things like that, and they'll let that sort of determine what they're doing. But in fact, it's cutting at the right moment to the right shot. And the match, if it's somebody moving their arm or something, if it's not exactly right, if you're cutting at the right moment, you can get away with a lot. I've heard it expressed. I wish I'd coined this phrase, but I didn't. But instead of cutting on motion, it's cutting on emotion,
Ah.
cutting the right spot for your audience. So those are important things. And then, respecting the director's vision, and and um, and not, with me, it's editing again. It's like one of the invisible arts in a way. So
Mhm.
I always try and not, it shouldn't be like Stan Warnow edits this. It should be like you edit not to sort of satisfy your ego about, like, look at this cut, look at that cut, and look at all these quick cuts. It's to serve the higher purposes of what the film is about. The director's vision, the writer's vision, all those things are important. I mean, there are other people that say editing is the most important thing, and maybe in aspects of it can be at sometimes, but it's all very important.
Are there some favorite movies of yours from an editing perspective?
Um, yeah, well, Citizen Kane is one of my favorite movies, I guess, but it's not so much from the editing. Again, it's
Hmm.
like camera and the story. Recently there was that film Roadrunner by about Anthony Bourdain.
Hmm.
Um, I thought the editing in that was really good, really good. Morgan Neville's the director, and he's used some Raymond Scott music in his films,
Huh?
and I know him slightly, but I'm not saying it because of that. It's just that I was so knocked out by the editing on that. And what I'm trying to think, that's a question I should have thought about in advance. But there are some another film that I really liked from 4 or 5 years ago now that wasn't uh, so well received was Molly's Game, and I thought that film was just terrific in every way, including the editing. Yeah.
Is there a movie you'd love to be able to get your hands on and recut?
The Dennis Hopper last movie,
Right.
that one he made, that very strange film he made where he was, I think he was trying to show how different he could be and how original, and that was at a time when there was that, the editing, the craft of editing was being expanded, and experimentalism was very much in vogue, and there had been Bonnie and Clyde, the great
Right.
Didi Allen editing Bonnie and Clyde, and they had taken all kinds of different things, and Jean-Luc Godard with Breathless and jump cuts and everything.
Hmm.
And I think he tried to do that. And to me, that film, as it is unwatchable, but I did watch it a while back, and I thought, yeah, I think if I could sort of make this in a way more conventional, it would
Right.
be better. But that's something that, yeah, I've thought about that. I suppose I could download it
There
and
you
do
go.
it, but I haven't.
Go for it. Why not? He's not gonna care
No,
anymore.
he's not going to care. Yeah.
Um, and wondering what you think about the sort of the recent trend in movie making, where now everything is this sort of short attention span, where you have cuts every 3 or 4 seconds, especially in action movies. You mentioned
Yeah.
pacing, and it doesn't seem that there is much pacing anymore. It's just this hyperactivity.
Yeah, no, I think it's a shame. I mean, and it extends on all levels. So it's shame in those action movies, which I hardly ever watch, but once in a while,
Right.
and it's that way on Facebook and everything.
Mhm.
There's the TikTok. I think has been really terrible in many ways. I mean, and it's just an extension of an overall trend of
Right.
short extension attention span. I
Yeah.
just cut a promo for uh, for the Grammys, and we had a Zoom meeting, and I cut this promo, and I really had said I was going to make it 2 minutes, but I did a first cut that was like 3.5, and people really loved it. And Rob, your friend, he was like,
Yeah.
"No, it's so good at this length. Just let's leave it." And I think he sent it around to people, and I
Yeah, I
hope
saw
they
it. Yeah,
watched it.
yeah, it's
But
nice.
on Facebook, very few people watched it all the way through. That's just the world we live in. I mean, and
It-
I think I'm as guilty as anybody else. I'll look at a video, and if it's not happening in 10 or 15 seconds, unless it's a topic I'm deeply interested in, I'll move on.
right. But have you watched Killers of the Flower Moon?
Not yet. I
Three
have
and a
the
half
D.
hours. There's some pacing going on there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, I haven't watched it. Yeah, I have it because I'm a DGA member, so I got it.
Right.
And it's on my list to watch. I haven't watched all of the films yet. I've watched the Barbie and Maestro, and I have to get to Oppenheimer and
Wow.
Killers of the Flower Moon, which I think it's a great story because
Yes.
we're going far afield now, but the story of the way the Native Americans have been treated in this country is an ongoing tragedy.
Yeah. So are you working on anything else these days?
No, I'm sort of talking about there was a singer at Woodstock named Bert Summer, who most people have never heard of,
Right.
yourself included, I suspect.
I'm
And
it's not ringing any
yeah,
bells.
no,
No.
no. Well, it's an interesting story, and a woman named Sharon Watts is doing a book about him, and got in touch with me about the book, and I think it could be a good film. Bert was a singer songwriter. He had been in the Broadway cast of Hair. he was signed to the record company that Artie Kornfeld was with at the time that he produced Woodstock, and he left shortly after. But he had released a record through that company. I forget what company it was, and with Artie, and so Artie was producer on Woodstock, and Burt got to perform at Woodstock, and we included him in the first early cuts of the film, and we all really liked his performance. But as we had to begin cutting down for time, it was clear that as much as we liked it, he probably wasn't going to ever achieve the fame of people like John Baez, who in the folk area, who's already famous, and Richie Havens, who opened the event and was incredibly dynamic. And Burt was kind of more on the quiet, folky side, but really wonderful. And and then he had a tragic story because he didn't appear at Woodstock. It wasn't in the film, and for other reasons, his career never really kind of fulfilled the potential that seemed to be there at that time. And he kind of went in a downward spiral, and he died, I think, in his 40s. And so it's an interesting topic to me about, the nature of fame and how fickle fame can be, and what it does to people. Because he once had a quote from him that was, "I was in the Broadway production of Hair, and I performed at Woodstock, and at the time, 30 cents will get you on the New York City subway."
Right.
Meaning that nothing happened for him. And so, it's kind of like a Searching for Sugar Man type story in a way.
Right, right. And not, not completely unlike what we've been talking about with your dad in terms of,
Yes,
recognition.
exactly.
And so, I mean,
No,
he may get his due, once
yeah.
his story gets
No, but
told.
it's very perceptive of you, because that's one of the appeals to me, is that that's a kind of theme in a way
Yeah.
of my film, and it's very close to what Bert's story is. I mean, there are no other similarities probably, but there's that one.
So are you, have you been to the Grammys before? Is this a first?
No, this is a first. I've been to some Emmy shows, and I've been to the DGA Awards, but I've never been to the Grammys.
Oh, well, you'll have a good
So
time. I mean, you're
I'm
obviously,
looking forward to it.
yeah. Are there several members of the family kind of going to represent, or?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's not like the old days too, where you would be nominated and you could bring guests. You have to pay for
Yes.
everybody else.
Yeah.
But my sister Deb, who is, a big part of our company that manages the catalog still, she's going. She lives in LA, and I'm going. And then the people, Jeremy Cohen, who was the man who made this record, the Raymond Scott Reimagined record, happen. And it's a great record and a great concept. Jeremy has a group called Quartet San Francisco,
Right.
and their the instruments are classical string quartet, and they know all the classical repertoire. They've all been classically trained. But Jeremy is also very, very much into pop music, and fell in love with Raymond Scott music, maybe 30 years ago now, when he first heard it, knowing that it was separate from the cartoons. He'd heard the cartoons growing up, but didn't know about Raymond Scott. So he is the producer of the album, along with Gordon Goodwin, who has a band called the Big Fat Band, and they created this album. That's the two groups working together, doing all kinds of other things, and also another Emmy award-winning group, Take Six, which is, technically an a cappella singing group, although they sing with instrumentation here, but they're Grammy winners too, and they did a couple of Raymond Scott tunes with the a cappella kind of, not a cappella, but humming. It's hard to describe, but it's really good.
Huh.
So they're going, obviously, Gordon and Jeremy, and I think their wives will be there.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
And you're at the daytime thing, which is a lot of fun. It really is kind of looser and, a little more laid back.
Yeah. Have you been?
Oh yeah, several times. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll enjoy it.
Yeah. Oh, because you're in Canada, right?
Yeah, I'm in Canada. I used to go down there and cover them for fairly regularly for a few years. I haven't been for a while now, but
Uh,
it's always a good time.
yeah, well, I've heard different things about the daytime event, so we'll see. That it's that that a lot of the bigger stars don't go there. But I found some video from 2020, and it seemed like there were quite a few well-known people who were there.
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely. Yeah, there was yeah, I mean it obviously depends on how the nominations go, but
Yeah,
in general, yeah, you there'll be plenty of that going on. But it's also
yeah,
the thing I found that was more enjoyable about it is that it's not the big production thing. It's more like just, you come up, they read the nominees, somebody comes up and says their little speech in it, and there's not all the pressure of everything. So
yeah.
people tend to be a little more,
And
open
there
and
are
honest.
performances too. In the YouTube video I saw, there were performances as well.
Yeah, sometimes they have more, sometimes less, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
All right.
yeah, whatever. It'll
Yeah.
be. It's exciting for me to go.
All right. Well,
And I'm
listen,
just
you have a good
thrilled.
time.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I will let you get on with your day. I'll say thanks for your
You
time today
too.
and thanks
Well,
for
thank you. Really
everything.
enjoyed it.
Thanks for the
Yeah.
honeymoon killers.
Yeah, that was quite the story, just right out of film school, and suddenly this thing which we didn't think was going to be much of anything became a big deal. Now
Yeah.
Woodstock was just a year later, but we knew that was a big deal.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Well, listen, best
Okay.
of luck at the
You,
awards and we'll
thank
see you
you.
somewhere down the road.
Okay, good. Thank you. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.